First of all, I now have a great pleasure to introduce Her Excellency Mary Robinson. Her Excellency Mary Robinson served as the President of Ireland before being made the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. She currently serves as the Chair of the Elders. For her long career, she worked on numerous issues related to climate change, climate justice, peace building, human rights, and women's empowerment. Her Excellency Robinson, please come on the stage. And everyone, please welcome Her Excellency Robinson.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, it is an honor and a privilege to be with you here today in Tokyo for this important and timely conference, and I very much welcome what has been said already. My last visit to Tokyo was in September 2019. I can't remember the exact day, but I think a number of you will remember it when I say it was the day after Japan had beaten Ireland in the rugby and got into the quarterfinal. And now I hear in baseball you've beaten the United States at an important final, so never underestimate Japan is my advice. But let's be more serious. Now we meet at a time when interconnected crises are increasingly the strains on the international multilateral system, making it harder to deliver a coherent, equitable, and sustainable response to common challenges. Humanity is facing multiple existential threats, as we've already heard, from the climate crisis to pandemics, nuclear weapons, and superpower confrontation. To speak bluntly, we are on the brink of a precipice, but our leaders are not acting with sufficient moral clarity, speed, or ambition to secure a peaceful and livable world. From cutting carbon emissions to strengthening arms control treaties and investing in pandemic preparedness, we know what needs to be done. The facts are clear, but the political will is lacking. Our leaders need a crisis mindset and must work together to tackle urgent threats. They must also place the global public good and a principled approach to multilateralism at the heart of their approach. Russia's war on Ukraine is a clear example. The consequences of this illegal and flagrant violation of the United Nations Charter are being felt in all corners of the globe. But the pursuit of national interests is undermining the global unity that is needed to respond to Russia's aggression. It's incumbent on the states in all regions to uphold the UN Charter and stand up for the core principles of sovereignty, territorial integrity, and independence. Neutrality in the face of Russia's aggression is not morally or legally defensible. It was therefore both an important and a very timely visit by Prime Minister Kishida to Kyiv, Ukraine, on Tuesday of this week. At the same time, we have to acknowledge the reality that powerful states in all regions, including democratic states, bear responsibility for the erosion of international norms, from the invasion of Iraq 20 years ago to the continuing impunity Israel enjoys for the repeated violations of international law in the occupied Palestinian territories. This is not about supporting a unipolar world, when it is so clear that the geopolitics of the 21st century will be very different to those of the 20th century. It's about recognizing that having one set of legal standards for the conduct of international affairs is all the more important at a time when the balance of power is shifting so significantly. I want to talk about existential threats. We must also not allow our rightful outrage at President Putin's aggression to detract international attention from other threats to shared peace and stability, including the climate and biodiversity crisis, pandemics, and nuclear weapons. None of these challenges can be overcome by any one country alone, no matter how big its size, how powerful its economy, or how strong its military. They require concerted and systematic cooperation by nation-states, regional alliances, and global bodies, combining political commitment, intellectual innovation, and a ceaseless determination to confront issues with moral integrity and with humility and boldness in equal measure. In this regard, I applaud the initiative of the organizers of the Tokyo Conference to bring together experts from leading think tanks from all G7 countries, plus Brazil, India, and Singapore. Such cross-border exchange and dialogue is indispensable if we're to defend and strengthen multilateralism in the face of deepening global divisions. Japan has a critical role to play in these global debates, informed by its rich history, its economic ingenuity, and its anchoring role as a strong democracy in a region undergoing significant geopolitical transformation. I've had the pleasure of visiting Japan many times over my career, including on a state visit as President of Ireland, as UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, and now as Chair of the Elders, the group of independent global leaders founded by Nelson Mandela who work for peace, justice, human rights, and a sustainable future. I've always valued the rich and stimulating discussions I've enjoyed in Japan and hope that I can highlight more areas where we can find a commonality of perspective here today. We have a duty to speak with precision, clarity, and humanity in our consideration of our responsibilities to the future of the world, always putting people first, those alive today and those yet unborn who will inherit our legacy. This intergenerational solidarity is a vital thread running through all the work I do with my fellow elders as members of the my fellow members of the elders. As elders, we're not beholden to any national interest. We no longer seek public office, and we can speak freely and fearlessly on any issue we wish. We are not a Western body, we are global. We seek to fulfill Mandela's legacy. We understand the challenges of holding political power as much as the opportunities it offers. And we acknowledge that the perspective of non-Western audiences are still too often disregarded at the global decision-making table. This must change. At the same time, drawing on the mandate given by our founder, Nelson Mandela, we hold firm as elders that human rights, freedom of expression, and equality are universal values that matter as much here in Asia as they do in Europe, Africa, or any other part of the world. Above all, it's clear to me that we will not meet our responsibilities to the future of the world by offering up the hollow promises of populism or naively utopian demands. Instead, we need to pressure leaders to take and make hard, practical choices, backed up by long-term commitments of resources and political capital. I want to highlight some immediate steps decision-makers can take in the months ahead, starting with Ukraine. Looking at the war in Ukraine, it's clear that failure to uphold international law and defend the most fundamental norms of the UN Charter risks opening the door to autocrats and aggressors everywhere, and disturbing echoes of the failure of the League of Nations in the 1930s. But when we assess global unity in response to Russia's war on Ukraine, there's not a simple divide between democratic and autocratic states. Some of the world's leading democracies, including India and South Africa, continue to abstain in UN General Assembly votes on this issue. Much of the global South perceives double standards in Western calls for solidarity over Ukraine, arguing, for example, that the same solidarity wasn't shown by the West when it came to sharing of vaccines and other medical countermeasures during COVID-19. Insufficient solidarity has also been a key characteristic of the rich world's response to the climate crisis, although the agreement on loss and damage at COP27 was a welcome step forward, albeit one that needs now to be implemented. Moreover, when it comes to other violent conflicts beyond Ukraine, many powerful states are resisting international scrutiny of violations of international law and protecting themselves and their allies from accountability. But our collective response to this challenge mustn't be to retreat from international law or a principled response to conflict and aggression. Quite the contrary. What we need is a redoubling of efforts to revitalize the multilateral system centered around a renewed commitment to international law and global equity. The elders support accountability. We believe setting up a special tribunal to prosecute the leaders responsible for the crime of aggression in Ukraine can contribute to both justice and a sustainable peace, as well as to deterring such crimes in the future. We believe it should take the form of a fully fledged international criminal tribunal endorsed by the UN General Assembly to underscore its global legitimacy and signal to all member states that peace and justice are two sides of the same coin and impunity will not be tolerated anywhere. The tribunal should have the ability to overcome immunities and prosecute the top leadership responsible for this aggression. Japan's presidency of the G7 this year is an important opportunity to show leadership on this issue and to forge G7 unity in response, in support of an international tribunal. When this issue is put to the UN General Assembly, as I hope it will be and it should be, I hope UN member states will rise to the moment and stand for peace and justice in Ukraine and elsewhere. I also want to speak briefly on nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation. The only solution to address the existential threats we face is greater commitment by states in all regions to multilateralism and to the consistent application of international law, whether in delivering global public goods, implementing climate action commitments, or responding to violent conflict and aggression wherever this takes place. This is the direct interest of all countries, as is taking urgent steps to minimize the threats posed by nuclear weapons. Japan knows better than any country on earth how devastating these weapons can be. It has been deeply disturbing to see President Putin making overt threats over the past year to use nuclear weapons in a futile attempt to influence the response to his brutal war on Ukraine. His decision to suspend participation in New START, the strategic arms reduction treaty between Russia and the United States, presents a serious risk of a new global nuclear arms race developing. Dialogue is essential for limiting risks, and leadership to highlight the threat of nuclear weapons is important. And that's why the elders support Japan's efforts to highlight nuclear risks as part of the G7 presidency. A strong statement from the G7 leaders on the nuclear threat would send an important message and should increase pressure on the P5 states in particular to finally live up to their commitments to disarmament under the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Let me say something on climate action. Japan has shown great leadership for many years in galvanizing global cooperation to realize a world without nuclear weapons. The climate crisis constitutes an equally acute existential threat, and I hope that Japan will show comparable leadership and prioritize the climate crisis as an important and urgent topic ahead of the G7 summit in Hiroshima in May. The climate crisis, as we've heard, is multifaceted and complex, but many of the shocks the world will continue to experience in 2023, such as energy disruptions, inflation instability, and food crises, can ultimately be linked to fossil fuel dependence. The war on Ukraine is a tragic reminder of these linkages and of the benefits for peace and stability that a durable shift to renewable energy would bring. Climate-induced displacement is a growing problem facing the world, one which will fuel further instability and conflict if its root causes remain unaddressed. Renewable energy is what will give us security, sustainability, and affordability, unlike coal or oil or gas, where there's a risk of creating new dependencies and stranded assets. Renewables are a safe bet, unlike unproven technologies, to make coal power plants more efficient. And I must say, I'm somewhat concerned to hear so much talk about the latter in the context of Japan's climate agenda for the G7 presidency. The world needs Japan's government and great industrial powerhouses to recognize the imperative of rapidly committing to go fossil fuel free and the risk of not doing so. The synthesis report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change was stark, as all of the recent reports have been, in reminding us of the precipice we are on. The future of our planet will not be well served if the titans of the industry become obsolete and defunct because they didn't act in time to adapt to the realities of our changing climate and economic paradigms. It's critical that the G7 maintains and builds on its collective climate commitments in previous years to end fossil fuel subsidies by 2025, to phase out coal by 2030, and to entirely decarbonize the power sector by 2035. By stepping up on this, the G7 would send a strong signal to the rest of the world on its members' unity in pursuing net zero. The world's leading industrialized economies must also show they are listening to vulnerable countries that are being buffeted by climate impacts on top of the multiple other crises and are struggling to access finance. This is critical to build trust between North and South at a time of division. The historic agreement of a loss and damage fund at COP27 was a good step forward in this regard and showed that multilateral cooperation is possible, even in these testing times. Wealthy countries must now build on this momentum and take a lead to ensure that money is urgently put into the hands of frontline communities when climate disasters strike. They must also show that they are honouring their existing commitments to double adaptation finance by 2025 and to meet the decades-old pledge of $100 billion a year in climate finance to vulnerable countries. 2023 provides a long overdue opportunity for the international community to reform the international financial institutions, such as the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. These reforms are vital to unlock unprecedented sums for sustainable development and a just energy transition in the global south. This kind of upfront investment is critical to strengthening the resilience of vulnerable countries to climate and security shocks, as well as to accelerate the private sector investment needed to build the decarbonized economies of the 21st century. I often say we're on the cusp of a clean energy, healthier, safer, more equal world. We're on the cusp. We can get there. But we're heading for a 2.4 degree world at best. In other words, it's a paradox and it's crazy. And somehow, world leaders must face this reality. Making funding available at scale will also act as a disincentive for countries tempted to seek support from lenders and states who are less scrupulous with regard to climate concerns and sustainable development. It is thus in the G7's own interest to support expansive and radical reforms to international finance institutions that will benefit the world's poor. Let me also say something on pandemics. The same symbiotic relationship between solidarity and self-interest is at play regarding the world's recovery from COVID-19 and the need to better prepare for and hopefully prevent future pandemic outbreaks. The multilateral system offers several opportunities in the months ahead for progress on pandemic preparedness and response. The ongoing negotiations over the pandemic accord present an important chance to redress the inequities so starkly exposed and exacerbated by COVID-19, which have further eroded trust in the multilateral system in many quarters. The elders strongly support the recommendation of the International Panel on Pandemic Preparedness and Response for the establishment of a Global Health Threats Council to elevate leadership on pandemic preparedness and response to the highest levels and to foster a whole-of-society approach. The upcoming pandemic high-level meeting at the UN in September is another important opportunity to make progress on this and other crucial recommendations through an ambitious political declaration. I hope that Japan can play a leading role here, as it has in the past on universal health coverage, another critical piece of the global health architecture with solidarity at its core. So in conclusion, from conflict resolution and upholding the UN Charter to tackling the existential threats of the climate crisis, nuclear weapons and pandemics, multilateral action and bold ethical leadership is essential. The challenge is not one of understanding or insufficient knowledge. Our leaders cannot claim that they have not been warned about the dangers ahead or provided with credible, detailed proposals for action. We have the recommendations on the independent panel for pandemic preparedness and response. The UN Secretary-General Guterres' warnings that humanity is one miscalculation away from nuclear annihilation, and the scientific data and recent synthesis report from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. We have the inspiration of great peacemakers like Kofi Annan and Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who offer a stern rebuke to cynics or fatalists, claiming that conflicts can never be resolved, or that the values of the UN Charter will always be secondary to national self-interest. What we now need is to strengthen and improve the multilateral system with the United Nations at its core to make it fit for purpose. This also means global citizens must work together through democratic institutions and public fora, such as this very conference, to bring pressure to bear on their leaders and hold them accountable for their actions. The task is daunting, no doubt, but I am confident that humanity will rise to the occasion when G7 leaders meet in Hiroshima in May. I hope that they will seize the moment and act with unity, urgency, and solidarity. Distinguished guests of the Tokyo Conference, I'd like to conclude my speech with the words of the former Japanese Prime Minister, Aishaku Sato, who was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1974 for his work on nuclear non-proliferation, together with the great Irish patriot, diplomat, and peace activist Sean McBride, who was also a good friend of mine. Prime Minister Sato said, "All peoples should be united in positive efforts to make peace a reality and to strengthen the foundations on which that peace rests, so as to secure for all humanity progress and a better life." Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for Her Excellency Robinson. Thank you for your very insightful keynote remarks. Thank you.